So I think we have all of our panelists here. And this next portion, in addition to hearing just about what everyone does in their conlangs and their different strategies and examples from a lot of people's different personal conlangs, one of my favorite parts of the LCC has been the panel we've been doing the last few conferences, where we choose a subject and invite a few people to just have a discussion on how that goes. So back at LCC 7 here in Calgary, we talked about what is the role of conlangs in the academy, and do conlangs have a role in the classroom for teaching linguistics or teaching other things? And I think we found yes, we did. Yes, we do. Last year in Cambridge at LCC 8, we talked about conlangs in literature, and we had a number of literature experts up there to talk about how conlangs get incorporated into film and television and book and things of that nature. And this year we opened it up and just said, hey, if anyone has any ideas, shoot us a proposal on what you would like to talk about. So Logan, who is our first speaker of the day, submitted a proposal based on a group that I think has been meeting. I'm not sure what platform you've been using, but online anyways, to look at different grammars. I believe it started with one of the Eskimo Aleut languages and has moved on since then. So I'm going to turn this over to Logan to introduce his fellow panelists and the topic. And if any of our other presenters that are currently on the Zoom channel want to chime in with questions at some point, feel free to unmute yourself. I keep saying unmute yourself and ask our panelists questions. And of course, I'll be monitoring the YouTube chat if anyone has any questions they want to pose there. So Logan, it's all yours.
Right. Well, I don't think I am the best person to introduce everybody else, so I'll let them introduce themselves. But y'all met me this morning, so hi, I'm Logan again. I'm a professional programmer and a degree-bearing linguist, and one of those things makes me money, and the other of those things makes me happy. So do the rest of you want to do a quick introduction before we get to questions and discussion?
Sure. I'm Rick. I want to be a paleobiologist, but I have always had sort of an interest in language, and that's what ended up drawing me into conlanging. And I'm actually fairly late into joining this group, I suppose.
Yeah. Aiden, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Aiden. You may know me on Reddit as the Ask Me About Tones guy, u/Siveru. I am finishing up a master's degree in linguistics and hoping to do academia and getting into the weeds on typology and so forth. But I still love conlanging, and I basically am doing a linguistics degree because of all of the conlanging things that I like and all of the things I've learned about by doing conlanging.
Oh, I should probably also mention I did a minor in linguistics in my undergraduate.
Hi, I'm Kevin Walker, and yes, I know there are lines on my video, and I'm pretty sure I'm that feedback problem too. I was pulling up the YouTube thing, and then anyway, I can't do anything about those lines because I think I just dropped my laptop too many times. Yes, I'm a failing theology student, and I guess generally interested in language and conlanging is probably the best way to put it. Sometimes really just more interested in reading languages. And yeah, I'm from Halifax. Anything else you'd say?
Say whatever you want. If you think that's enough introduction, then that's enough introduction. So Kevin doesn't act like a movie star, but Kevin is kind of our star right now because Kevin started the group. So I think that's a good place to start out the discussion. So Kevin, what motivated you to start the group?
I think, well, I just found this, well, like I said, I'm always interested in just reading a new language and seeing how it works. But I do have a habit of just sort of getting as far as the phonology and then getting distracted trying to pronounce things, and that sort of being the end of it. So yeah, I guess I just found this Inuktitut website, which I'll plug here. It's Inuktitut. And I thought, oh, well, this is really well set up, and I have an actual chance of getting through to the end of this and learning a thing or two, but not if I'm doing this on my own. There's no way I'm going to hold myself accountable. So I just said, why don't I see if anyone else wants to start a group? And I should also say that this was in the very early stages of COVID, at least in Canada. So I thought I would have a lot of free time on my hands, being banned from libraries and things like that. We all know how that worked out. But yeah, so yeah, more or less as soon as lockdown happened, I proposed this to the language, to the Conlang mailing list, and yeah, I got some takers.
All right. Well, the rest of us obviously didn't start the group, but I think we all had obviously some motivation for getting into it. And as Kevin mentioned, yeah, it was right at the beginning of lockdowns. So when I saw that message, I had kind of a similar thought of, well, I don't know if I'm going to have a whole lot of free time, but I'm not going to have a whole lot of social time. So talking about linguistics once a week sounds like a good way to stay sane. And so that's why I got into it. And now I think my motivations have changed. But we'll talk about all that in the rest of, we've got most of an hour left, so that was that was my motivation. And Aiden and Rick, you want to say something about that?
I joined the group because Logan posted a thing about it in the Facebook group Natlangs and Linguistics, and I sort of have the same problem where I do enjoy reading descriptive grammars, but sometimes I read parts of it and then forget about it, and then I do enjoy learning about language in that way. But I figured that this would be a cool way to explore reading descriptive grammars and also maybe a bit about what it takes to write a good descriptive grammar. And so I figured I'd join the study group. And I was also in the middle. I joined while we were towards the early stages of lockdown, not at the very, very beginning.
Yeah. I think I can sort of third or fourth that sentiment of trying to read grammars and never actually doing it. I don't even get as far as the phonology. I'm like, man, I should read that grammar, and then I just don't. So this has been nice because it sort of provides that structure where, like, even if you didn't necessarily get around to reading the bit we were supposed to read that week, well, maybe somebody else did, and so we can at least talk about it, or we can skim it and we can talk about it. And it's less even about accountability and more about like just forward momentum. Like, that it's going to happen next week, and if we're off next week, well, then it's going to be the week after, and so you're not sitting around being like, man, I should do that, and then it just doesn't happen.
Yep. And yeah, so I think the next question on my list was going to be how has this improved our study habits generally? And I think we just addressed that. It makes us actually do it. But I think it's worth pointing out another aspect to having the group is that what we're studying isn't an individual decision. So I guess I'll skip ahead a little bit, and maybe we can talk about how we've organized things, because at no point did anybody really sit down and say, okay, here are the rules. This is like the formal schedule we're following, and like the code of conduct for how this is going to work. It's all just kind of evolved, but maybe if we can tell other people how it has evolved, that might help with getting similar groups started. So, I mean, Kevin picked the first language because it was Kevin's idea. And I, for one, would probably never have even gotten as far as Aiden in, thinking maybe I should read that grammar someday on my own. But I wanted the social interaction. And so I started studying Inuktitut because that's what Kevin picked. And then I don't know if Kevin would have ever looked at Tlingit otherwise, but once we got to the end of Inuktitut, we just kind of thought, okay, well, there was no plan. What do we do now? And we'd cycled through a couple of other group members who came in for a few weeks and then left. And so Kevin and I were the ones who were left. And so we just said, well, do you want to stop? No. How do we keep going? Well, I guess it's my turn to pick a language. So I picked Tlingit because my sister lives in Alaska, and that's one of the local languages. And then we've just kind of continued with whoever the most senior member of the group is at the time, who hasn't left yet. Whenever we get to the end of a language, ends up picking the next one. And so,
or well, I suppose it's more the oldest person who hasn't yet picked the language.
That's what I thought was whoever hasn't chosen a language yet gets to choose.
And is left. And so I think it was in the description posted on the website. We've gone through Inuktitut, Tlingit, Yade, which I can't pronounce that consonant, but close enough. And then I never actually remember the whole list. It's bad.
I wanted to make a point that we've gone through and done quite a variety of different kinds of sources. Like this is not just all academic big reference grammars, because we started, I wasn't there for Inuktitut, but that was a teach yourself Inuktitut website. Then we did Singit, which was a 1920s grammar by Franz Boas, which was very difficult to read because it is not structured or transcribed or thought about at all in the ways that modern linguistics works. We spent a long time sitting there trying to figure out what in the world he was talking about, but it was sort of interesting in that regard. We did Yade, which is a short grammar sketch that I wrote about a Papuan language that I got to do a little bit of sort of semi-field work on. We did Coptic, which was a very philological sort of, in the style of the Latin grammars that you read in, upper level Latin class if you did that in high school. So there was a lot of, this is this way because of history. And we're like, okay, that's not super helpful. Sometimes it was, a lot of times it wasn't. We did, what was it? We did Sandawe, which was a real scholarly thing. And now we're doing English, which is also like a massive scholarly work that apparently took the author 30 years. And she's making it long kind of just to show that, it almost feels like. But it's still really good.
Yeah, 4 weeks in and we're still in danger of getting stuck on phonology.
4 weeks in and we're just now getting into like phonotactics.
Yeah, we did phonotactics. We're just gonna get into oh gosh, what's even the word? Prosody. We're gonna get into prosody.
Yeah, to put it into perspective, this is a grammar where the first 4 chapters are about the phonology.
I thought it was the first 3. The first chapter is an introduction.
Oh, the first one's the introduction, yeah.
Chapter
4 is still
2, 3, and
phonology.
4 is the
This seems like, sorry guys, this seems like a really good point to interject with actually the second question we got on YouTube, but I'll come back to the other one later. how does one get to the end of a language? How did you define what's the end of a language?
Or as long as I've been there, it's just whenever we got to the end of whatever the source was
Yeah.
or
So-
sources.
We're not
So-
exploring languages so much as we're exploring particular write-ups of languages.
Yes, yeah. So to wrap up the point that I was trying to start on, one of the major benefits is that we are all getting exposed to things that we would never have otherwise been exposed to. So it's both in terms of the particular languages that we are studying and also the styles of description that we're looking at. Yeah, whichever way we're studying it, it's the source is written down in linear textual form. So that's another aspect of how we've organized how the group works. You take whatever the source is, and we start at the beginning, and we just read through it in order until the end in, appropriately sized chunks for each week. So when you get to page 100 out of 100, then we've run out of pages of the grammar to talk about, and somebody's turn to pick the next one.
Sometimes the sources are supplemented with other sources, like with the Sandawe grammar. I think one thing that we had was a dictionary of words where, like, the person who wrote the grammar was not particularly good with defining all the biological, all the types of organisms inside its text, and so it was sometimes useful because inside the dictionary that we had that somebody else made, I forget the person's name, but that whoever made that dictionary of Sandawe was far better at giving the binomial names of particular words that refer to particular organisms that are found in the area.
Mm-hmm.
There was a wonderful sample sentence about a
rhinoceros.
When the traditional Sandawe proverb, when the rhinoceros eats a cactus, he trusts in his anus. Anyway, turns out it was a hippopotamus.
And also, the cactus is not a cactus. I actually knew almost immediately it couldn't possibly be a cactus because there's only one species of cactus that's native to Africa. And so I immediately figured that it was something in the family Euphorbiaceae, which sometimes convergently evolved to look a lot like cactuses. But it turns out, it was in fact a member of that family that looks a whole lot like cactuses, but isn't a cactus.
So this was relevant to understanding the examples, like knowing exactly what they were talking about.
Yeah, there was one really
maybe not the grammar, but yes.
Yeah, but there was actually one even more specific example where the author was talking about how certain animals are given, the words for them are given as names for boys and for girls, and there's a difference between which animals are chosen for which one, and the author was still not good at defining which organisms are which, so it was actually useful to figure out what the organisms are.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is a good segue to point out another major advantage of studying in a group, which is that Rick has a background in biology, which the rest of us do not. And so there are plenty of things that we just wouldn't have noticed needed to be discussed if Rick weren't around for that particular language. So aside from being introduced to languages that we would not have studied on our own, being introduced to particular styles of describing languages that we would not have come across on our own, we're also, there's an aspect of you get more out of the reading just by discussing it with a group, because somebody else is going to read the same thing and notice different stuff than you did. But that is magnified enormously when we have, a typologist, a computer scientist, a theologian, and a biologist.
As well as people familiar with a wide range of different languages. Like I'm mostly familiar with like Japanese and a few other things. Logan can bring in Russian, Kevin's got a background in like some of the biblical stuff, like biblical Greek and so forth. So we've got a wide range of sort of familiarity with other things that we can bring in and be like, oh, that's like this thing over here, and I wonder what that means for how this works. And maybe it's like this construction in Russian where they do this, and you're like, oh, maybe it actually is, and maybe this description isn't quite getting at it. And so we're able to sort of bring in different things and have all of these different perspectives on what might actually be going on. Because we're definitely approaching this from the sense of maybe the grammar's not actually accurately describing everything, because description is inherently flawed. It's the best we can do. And sometimes it's really helpful to be able to ask, like, well, what might actually be going on here? And who knows something that might shed some light on this from other things they may have read in the past.
Yeah,
that's a great segue. If you look in the chat here on Zoom, there's a couple comments there, and the first one is how reading these grammars is influencing you. So does reading the grammar give you inspiration for how to present your grammar, as well as specific ideas about linguistic information?
Yeah, I want to answer that, but I want to prefix it first, because a lot of the sources that we have read by current standards are honestly not that great. Like the Tlingit grammar by Franz Boas from the 20s. It was probably the best that he could do at the time, and no shade on Franz Boas, but it missed a lot of stuff, and it was very unclear in several ways. But that doesn't mean that it was a bad thing to read for the group, because when there is stuff missing in a grammar, that provides more opportunities for us to engage our brains and discuss first off, what might actually be going on, and second off, to take note that, oh, I'm annoyed that this particular bit of information is missing, or I'm annoyed at how this was presented. And that in itself is a really good way of learning how you should actually do it. If you were going to write it yourself, write your grammars so that you wouldn't be annoyed if you were reading them. So that's my intro, but I don't want to talk too much. So does anybody else want to try to address that question more directly?
About the English, I'm the one who actually chose English because I have a lot. The Caucasus was probably my first real linguistic love, and I have admiration for Joanna Nichols, who wrote the book. But she's like really thorough. Like you can tell, she's really thorough, and it is just really interesting to read a grammar that is just really thorough in documenting all the possible, or in not all cases, but in many cases, where she just says, these are all the situations where this particular phenomenon happens or whatever. And you can totally tell she spent 30 years on this. And it is just interesting to see that particular situation happening where people are very thorough in documenting all the phenomena that they want to discuss in whatever the section is.
Yeah, I'll second that about the English grammar, because I definitely have a problem when I go to write grammars. I've never actually finished one, but part of the issue is I sort of try, the Yare one sort of notwithstanding. But like, the problem is I tend to be very, very sort of terse and try and say as much as I can in as little space as I can, which is just sort of a habit of mine and not for any particular reason. And reading through this English grammar is like, oh, this is what it looks like when you want to be as thorough and as complete as you can reasonably manage in a human lifetime. And these are the kinds of things you think about to put in, and this is how you organize those, this whole category of things that you would consider, detail that you can maybe leave aside. It's very helpful to see that.
Yeah, well, and we, I think we summed it up fairly well just this last Thursday, with the observation that if you write too much, people can always skim over it, but people can't read information that you don't write. So just
Yeah.
put in everything. And going back a language to Sandawe, there were a lot of aspects of Steeman's analysis of Sandawe which we just didn't agree with all the time. But he was really good at including all of the examples from his field work to back up his analysis. So when we didn't agree with him, we could look at the exact same data that he used and analyze it ourselves, which just kind of it speaks to the same idea. Just put in as much information as you can, and if it's too much, people can skim.
I want to take the opportunity to pull a YouTube comment that's been passed to us on Zoom from Jackson P. Any advice for those with ADHD-induced frequent project abandonment issues? Yes, I have ADHD. It causes me similar issues. It's not that I abandon projects, it's just that I can't sit down and work on them for any period of time. But sort of in this context, I have found this discussion group to be the only reason that I can read through these grammars and get anything out of them, because it happens regularly. I've committed to it. And if I flaked out and didn't remember to read anything, somebody else usually has. And so I can just sort of show up and still get something out of it. And that very much helps. In a more general sense, if you're asking for that, this is sort of off topic, but I've found that I like to tinker with conlangs rather than sit down and work on them. So I just sort of try and build out enough that I can sort of play around with it in my head as I go through my day. And that helps me start to flesh out everything else as I'm just tinkering. So anyway, that's an aside in case that was what you were asking.
I actually have similar things where most of my conlangs are sketches that I thought of on one day, and then maybe I'll get back to it later, maybe. Although I did once come up with a conlang with one of my friends, and we presented about it way back in the Cambrian. But that was a situation where, because I was working with one of my friends and we were making a language together, it made it so that I had more of a reason to care about the inner workings of the language.
I'm going to go back to Lauren's question briefly, because I remembered a thing that I had forgotten earlier. And then I've got a question for Kevin. But another thing that reading a wide variety of grammars has helped me out with is realizing that it is okay for things to be a little bit non-linear. Because I have had serious issues in documenting my conlangs, and I'll just sit and stare at the same grammar and just move sections around for hours trying to figure out what is the best order to present this in, because language is all interconnected and there's not necessarily any good way to linearize it. And when you go and read all of these grammars of natural languages written by professional linguists, you start to realize that they have exactly the same problems. And so, we'll be reading chapter 1 on phonology, and there is just no way to get around the fact that you're gonna give some examples, and those examples are going to reference stuff that doesn't get explained until chapter 5. And you just kind of have to live with it. You pick an order and you use footnotes and forward references and just accept that the reader can care about that or not, and they'll read it in whatever order they need to. So I don't know that any of these grammars have specifically given me ideas about how I should structure my writing, but it has reduced my anxiety about structuring my writing considerably.
I remember having read, and this was before the group, this was some time ago. I actually did manage to get through this grammar because it was mind-blowing. But I picked up a grammar of Kayardit for $7 from my local half-price books. And I remember reading through the phonology chapter. Absolute Kayardit. It's a Australian language from an island off the northwest coast of Australia. Tankik, I think. And I remember reading through the phonology chapter and not understanding any of the glosses and transcriptions, like any of the grammar part at all. It's like, okay, I see the phonology stuff happening, but why are there like future affixes attached to nouns and case attached to verbs? What is going on here? And it turned out that the language had a absurd sort of system where everything that's embedded gets affixes for everything above it in the embedding. And you get these very long strings of copied affixes as you go down the chain deeper and deeper into the embedded structure. But like, there was no explanation given for this whatsoever. They were just like, you're just going to deal with the fact that there's future affixes attached to nouns, and don't ask, we'll deal with it later, kind of a thing. So like, it happens that you get these frustrating, things are all circular and all interrelated, and you're just going to have to figure out how to handle that. But I do think it's probably helpful to go through a bunch of grammars. I mean, I don't think we've really seen enough at this point, but just to get an idea of like the different kinds of ways you can linearize a description of a language. And, especially for languages with particular concerns, because obviously you're not going to do it the same way for different kinds of languages. You're going to have, a whole chapter on something in one language that doesn't exist in another language. And so getting a sense of like, when this happens, this is a way to put it in a grammar in a linear book style fashion. Or when that happens, here's a way to integrate it into a grammar. It's helpful to see that.
Mm-hmm. And none of the grammars that we have looked at so far have much in common in terms of structure, except I think they all start with phonology so far. That's been consistent, but that's about it. So yeah, if you find, there are several templates out there, like SIL has a template grammar, and I know a bunch of different conlangers have put out sample templates. David Peterson uses one. And if you start trying to write to a template and just find out that it doesn't fit, that's normal.
Yes. And I think it's helpful to sort of see a bunch of grammars and sort of build almost an impressionistic kind of subconscious idea of how to structure a grammar by exposure to a bunch of grammars. And that, I think, will help you get over some of those, wait, crap, how do I structure this kinds of problems.
Yep. Okay, so I said I had a question for Kevin. On reflection, it's actually more of an order for Kevin. Because you told me you were going to come on here and just talk about all the digressions, and I think that's a useful thing. That's an important part of how the group works and what has made it continue to work. So tell us about digressions.
Oh, well, I mean, for starters, there's the partially justified digressions, which are just when someone says, oh, this is like Russian, and then I say, oh, it's like German too, or something like that. And we basically just end up talking about, I don't know, what was that Japanese, or that Ryukyuan language with a syllabic V or something like
Miyako? That? Yeah.
And that can eat up 10 good minutes, especially if you say haven't done the reading, as many of us often have.
You gotta always have somebody that does the reading. It doesn't have to be the same person every week, but you gotta have somebody.
Yes.
It's pretty much always Logan.
It pretty much is.
I guess that's why I'm the moderator now.
Yeah, and well, yeah, I think there is a social component to this too. And so we're generally pretty permissive of digressions into, I don't know, Canadian politics, or really whatever is on someone's mind, something interesting that happened to them, and yeah, maybe that happens a bit more once the hour mark has elapsed. But yeah, so we've gotten to know each other a bit more, which I think is nice, especially compared to, say, doing this on email, like the Conlang mailing list. That's the only real social forum for conlanging I know, where often you're really getting to know someone through whatever thoughts they have on language, which is valuable, but it's also not necessarily a way to make community in quite the same way, which can then lead to more conversation about language.
Plus, sometimes it's nice to just sort of, have the opportunity to hear from somebody some neat thing that they know about some other language that maybe isn't what you're studying right now, but that doesn't mean it's not interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Yeah, I've mentioned a few times that we can apparently find a way to talk for an hour about any arbitrarily small piece of a grammar. But that would not be the case if you had to exclusively talk about that language and what was explicitly encoded in that text of the grammar. So for anybody else who wants to start up their own group, just keep in mind, if it's probably not going to work that great if you go into it thinking, everybody who joins this group is going to have to stay entirely on topic. We are talking about this language. We are talking about this chapter of this language. I would even go so far as to say most of the benefits of doing the group study only come about because we allow the discussion to wander to wherever it might go.
And obviously there's a point where it's like, okay, we either this tangent has petered out or like it's been 15 minutes and then somebody will be like, so Sandawe. And then we go back to actually talking about the thing we were supposed to be talking about.
Yes.
I think Rick was going to say a thing that I maybe.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I was literally about to make the same point, but sometimes when a tangent goes on too long, eventually somebody brings up the name of whatever the language is, and then we go back to the topic.
Yep.
I think Sai had a question if they want to jump on and ask it.
Yes.
Hey, so as an inveterate Engelanger, for one, I have something against linearity, but putting that aside, how do you avoid being limited by what happens to have been done in a documented Natlang that has existed to date, as opposed to what could have come up in a Natlang? Because Natlangs aren't like randomly selected from the possibility space of possible Natlangs. They're mostly copies from copies, etc., unless you've got something super isolated. So how do you avoid your ideas that you come up with or discuss being limited to just what happens to have arisen to date?
So I will say that we, on a fairly regular basis, will come out of either discussing a particular feature or trying to understand a description we don't particularly agree with necessarily, or some sort of analytical process that we're going through in whatever we're discussing, and we'll come out of it often with like, okay, so this language doesn't do X, but it wouldn't be surprising to see a language that does do X, sort of given the reasoning that we had to go through to figure out what's going on here. We've come up with an alternative way of doing something that seems Natlangy, or like this system is a restriction of a system you could just unrestrict and then it would be, whatever, or all sorts of different ways where we come across ideas for ways to twist maybe riff on the Natlang system we're looking at that it itself does not in fact do.
Yeah, and just for me personally, I haven't taken notes on how often this happens to everybody else, but Sometimes it'll be I come up with an idea for how a thing might work that isn't going to be explained for another few chapters. And then a few chapters later, we get to the actual explanation and it's like, oh, I guess I was wrong. But hey, I could make a conlang that did it that way. And other times it happens within the span of 10 minutes that, you know, I've done the reading for this week and I think I understand it. And then usually Kevin, I think, ends up pointing
Yes,
out
I'm
that
aggressive.
no, that's not actually how it works. And you know, I come around and think, oh, okay, so that's how this language actually does it. But hey, I could make a conlang that did it the way I thought it worked. And then of course there's always just the Natlang already does it except worse kind of thing, where so many times, either in the language that we're actually studying or as part of one of the many digressions that we go on, we find out that, oh, hey, a language actually does do this thing that we thought was completely ridiculous. So I guess we can do that now.
Or alternatively, this language does something that none of us ever even considered. And like, yes, it has one particular implementation of that idea, but oh my goodness, you could do this in so many different ways. Like I remember I ended up putting this in my master's thesis because it was so relevant to what I'm thinking about on a regular basis. But Sandawe has this really weird marked non-topic
Oh my
system.
gosh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Not
where
the topic.
the way it does both verb agreement and information structure marking is that everything that's in the sentence, except the subject, gets that isn't a topic, gets a verb agreement clitic on the end. And the subject, which is assumed to be the topic most of the time, doesn't get anything. But if it's not the topic, then you get a special, the subject is not a topic marker that doesn't do any agreement because it's on the subject. But you'll end up with these phrases, like sentences, where the subject is the topic, and then you've got like 5 different nouns and adjuncts in the verb phrase, and all of them get this subject clitic on because none of them are the topic, because the topic is the subject. And I've never thought of anything like that. This is ridiculous. But no, Sandawe totally does it. And as far as I know, there's no other like agreement information on the verb necessarily. Maybe sometimes there is.
Well,
and there's other
sometimes
permutations.
that clitic ends up attaching to the verb, so it looks like verb agreement, but it's actually not because
it's actually
could go
marking verb
somewhere
focus.
else. Yeah.
Yeah. And then apparently also this only happens in realis sentences, and irrealis sentences do something else that I don't think we ever figured out what was. And so it was just
Well,
this,
and Steeman kind of dismissed the whole thing in a couple of sentences by saying that information structure in Sandawe is clearly complicated. And we're like, yes.
Yes, it is. So, but like, it opens up a whole world of a way to do information structure via a marked non-topic system that like I haven't thought that hard about them in general. The ones I've seen, like Japanese, generally only involve the subject, and everything else is just like, well, of course it's not the topic unless it happens to be marked as topic. But Sandawe is a system where the only way to do any information structure stuff is to mark all of the things that aren't a topic. And I'm sure there's a bunch of different ways you could do that in all sorts of strange permutations and going even weirder and so forth.
One of the questions I get a lot when I'm doing a presentation for a conlang class, high school, university, anything like that, because I also teach languages sometimes that have, I really hate to use this term, but I'm going to use it, what some people might call exotic grammar. Nothing exotic about the language, it's just unfamiliar. I'm asked all the time, how do I avoid getting over-influenced by a language so that I'm just not making a relex of that language accidentally? And with all the time you all are spending with particular grammars, how do you avoid getting too influenced by what you're reading?
I think the fact that you can spend time with languages that work very differently, and you spend a whole lot of time sort of trotting across the world with a bunch of languages that work very, very differently means that you end up learning a whole lot about how language in general can do various functions in very different ways. So you end up, insofar as you can be influenced, you can end up not being particularly influenced by any one particular grammar.
Yeah, I think it's sort of the same thing that I mentioned before about like figuring out how to structure your grammar. It feels almost like the more you come across different structures in language, the more you sort of have a subconscious picture of how language can work, and the easier it is to start pulling out of that things that don't actually exist in any real language, because you're no longer copying, you're imitating in a very different sense. You understand kind of the reasoning, what's going on and why, and you're spinning that into a new thing rather than just saying this language does it in this way and therefore I will do it in this way.
Mm-hmm. And somewhat paradoxically, incompetence is useful here, because like it's easy for a lot of us to end up relexing English because we all implicitly know English. But, you know, Kevin started out the group with a teach yourself course for Inuktitut. And by the end of that, I could not speak Inuktitut. I still can't speak Inuktitut. I definitely don't have any like subconscious biases about how Inuktitut should work. So I can't relex Inuktitut. What I can do is I can attempt to relex Inuktitut and do it really badly. And that's gonna end up producing a totally different language because I don't actually know how to relex Inuktitut.
Yeah, and I think that connects back to our point earlier about our reanalyzing things, analyzing things wrong, realizing we were wrong, but deciding to go off and make conlangs based off our wrong description anyway. Yeah.
Okay, we've got looks like 13 minutes left. I have two more things that I wrote down ahead of time that I want to talk about, and then hopefully the YouTube community will have a bunch more questions that we can address specifically. So thing number one, I'm gonna reference back a little bit. One of you all said something about how somebody has to actually do the reading every week. Yeah, I think that should be fairly obvious. Not everybody has to do the reading because you can just kind of read along as the discussion goes on. But more specifically than somebody has to do the reading, it has been very helpful to specifically take notes about the reading ahead of time. So if you're going to start up your own discussion group, probably, I mean, this isn't how it's worked out in our case because we sort of grew the group rules organically. But if somebody were going to start your own on purpose, I would say, as the person starting it, just decide that you are going to read every week and be motivated by the fact that other people are expecting you to, and also take notes about the interesting things, because by the time you get around to actually getting on the call and discussing it, you will have forgotten what you actually thought was interesting about what you read. If multiple people take notes, that is not a problem. But somebody at least needs to have notes that can form some kind of an agenda. And you don't want to stick to that agenda slavishly, because as we've also talked about, digressions are like the life of the group. It doesn't work if you have to stick to a strict agenda. But having some notes and having an agenda to start the discussion going, and provide a point to return from those digressions has been really important. Any other thoughts before I move on? Okay. Okay, I'm gonna move on to my next question then. So all of us and everybody who has been in the group previously, who is incidentally not part of this panel, we all happen to be at least college students. Some of us are still in college, some of us have graduated already. Oh, yes, and I'm accidentally answering a question from the chat. Yeah, it is a lot like a graduate seminar. I'm sure our academic backgrounds have influenced that a bit, but it's definitely not necessary. Every time we switch languages, I've put out notifications to various social media saying, hey, if you're interested in the next language we're doing, please come and join. And so far it happens to have been people who have been to college or later, but if anybody who happens not to have gotten a college degree wants to join, totally not a big deal. And so that was where I wanted to go next. So I'm wondering what everybody else thinks about how could this idea be adapted for other purposes and other demographic groups, or does it even need to be adapted? Like, could the Linguistics Society of America start promoting this style of discussion as an activity for high school linguistic clubs, or general public outreach, or whatever?
I think a lot of the issues really only comes down to, I mean, obviously there's a, I don't have the skills to have this kind of discussion issue, maybe if you're, middle school or something. But as long as you could have a, serious Zoom meeting about a, scholarly-ish topic, even if very, very watered down, I think that's perfectly fine. The one issue that I can think of is sort of level of academicness of source material / level of academicness of the discussion. I certainly feel like I am perfectly, like, yes, I'm about to finish a graduate degree in linguistics, but I'm totally happy to have somebody who is, just starting out and knows what a morpheme is, come in, and I will happily explain to them all of the grand upper level realizations about information structure and tone and whatever I happen to be having, to the degree that it's possible. And obviously we can, okay, yeah, we're going to spend the next hour talking about autosegmental phonology. Maybe we should not do that. But but I feel like
not do that anyway.
Yes. But I feel like low level of background in technical linguistics is only an obstacle in as much as it is not properly accommodated by either the source material or other people in the group.
It happened frequently enough where if somebody or another didn't know about a particular term in one of the grammars, it happened to me a ton in the Coptic one, because I've never been in like a high school or college Latin class where
all the terms really...
I didn't. Yeah, and so people in the group were fortunately more familiar with this stuff, and so I felt fairly free to ask, what does this mean? And then somebody would say, this means whatever. So that's that I feel is one of the strengths of the group, is people are, if things like that do come up, you're perfectly allowed to just say, what does this mean? And somebody who's in the group who's more informed about whatever it is will say, this is what that means, and this is how it comes up.
Yeah, I think having a difference, having a sort of spectrum of levels of familiarity with high level academic linguistics is a benefit, because you can the people who are relatively new with this have an opportunity to learn a bunch and learn things they never otherwise might have thought to go and find to learn. And then those of us on the upper end can maybe be brought down to earth sometimes and be like, wait, you're kind of, wondering about high level theoretical things when actually maybe it's something very simple going on here. And you're like, oh yeah, no, never mind. It totally is.
Yeah. And you can also be forced to figure out how to explain things.
Yes.
Which, it has often been said the best way to make sure that you know something is to try to teach it. Okay, so we got another question coming in from YouTube, which I think this is a good one for you, Aiden, because you wrote a grammar, which we discussed in the group. So
Critique viciously.
in comparing grammars as text, have you discovered or come to any conclusions about what makes a grammar more readable or understandable, style, organization, and theoretical approach? So Aiden, what conclusions did you come to about how to write your grammar and make it more understandable?
I mean, the grammar that I wrote was being compared at the time to the Tlingit grammar that is not really necessarily a fair comparandum because like nobody's going to write a grammar like that anymore. We've moved on as a science. But I think you do get a sense of like, I think like Logan was talking about earlier of, the things that you're reading along and you're like, man, I am not really satisfied with the way they described that or the way they presented that or whatever. You do get kind of a sense of what not to do, as it were, in a grammar for readability purposes. One of the things that I have learned and that I was trying to do with the grammar I was writing before we even started this, but I think has been hammered home by this discussion group is examples are the lifeblood of a grammar. And in many ways, more than you might even think. Like, obviously, you're going to have a lot of examples in a grammar, but like, you need to have a lot of examples in a grammar. And not just, here is a thing, here is an example I just created of how that thing works. And obviously, in a conlang, you're going to have examples you just created, but especially in a Natlang grammar or in the grammar of a conlang that's really been well developed, using real world texts, real world situations that give the readers an opportunity to maybe reanalyze what you're saying is one thing. They can check your work because you're giving it in a real context that somebody really said, rather than creating an example that illustrates a point that may not actually be correct. Having comparative examples where it's like, here is how this thing happens in this sentence. Here's an example of a sentence that doesn't have this thing and how it's different, so that you could very clearly see the change that is being talked about, the morpheme that's being talked about, the syntactic mechanics that are being talked about. Those sorts of things, both of those I think are very important for readability of a grammar. And then I guess the one thing that I'm might also say is have a lot of cross references. And if something is weird, maybe reference the part where you talk about it, even if that's not for another 5 chapters, or that was 5 chapters ago and maybe they forgot about it now. And whatever it is, there's and I'm sure there's more that can be brought out of this, but seeing not only some well-written grammars, but also some rather less well-written grammars in the process of doing this has really helped solidify some of those philosophies that I have about clear and helpful grammar writing.
Yeah. I think it can be pretty well summarized as the correct ordering and structuring of a grammar for any particular language depends on the language. You can't really generalize that, but what you can generalize is phonology goes first. And then beyond that, just have all of the data. Your explanation of the data is not as important as just have all of the data, and don't worry about the fact that it's nonlinear, because it is nonlinear. So put in all the cross references and all the data.
There's a couple extra questions in the YouTube comments that maybe you want to check out after we wrap up, including how do you name a morpheme for a pickleative, a morpheme that turns a food item into a pickle, and be creative like that. But I think the most important one
there was a great derivational affix in Sandawe for taking a noun and turning it into a verb, meaning to use that noun as an ingredient in cooking.
Oh, there we go. So how we name these things, but I think the most important one to wrap up. My YouTube comments jumped on me. Do you have any contact facility to help people get in contact with others who'd like to join such a group? So I think there's a great opportunity to promote your group if you're looking for other members, accepting other members, or tell people how to start their own.
Social media. Kevin started this one by just posting to the Conlang mailing list and saying, hey, who wants to have a call? And then, yeah, I've advertised on Facebook and Reddit. I haven't been involved in any of the other groups, but based on Reddit comments, I think there have probably been a couple that came out of that from other people saying, oh yeah, I don't want to join yours, but this sounds like a good idea. Who wants to get with me and study this other language? So yeah, just get on whatever your favorite social media is, pick a language and say, hey, who wants to study this with me?
Yeah. And as a side comment that I just thought of, if you are interested in starting your own, I think there probably is a sort of functional limit on how many people you can have in it, because once you start to get past about 5 or 6 people in a Zoom meeting, it starts to be a lot harder to participate. And I think even in person, there's sort of a point where there's too many people with too many things to say for it to really be a fulfilling discussion for everybody that's there.
Yeah, but 4 or 5 has been working out well, and 6 would probably be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but that's probably the limit.
Yeah, probably not more.
It's the same reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same reason I don't want 7 players in my Zoom D&D games.
Exactly the same reason. Yes.
So I want to thank all of you for coming on, and of course Logan for submitting the panel idea and preparing a few of the questions. Like I said, there's a couple extra questions in the YouTube chat there if you feel like popping over there and discussing with people. I thought it was awesome. The YouTube comments would seem to back me up, so I think it's been really helpful for everyone. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
I have a lot more respect for what field linguists do.
I appreciate that.